What we have heard from the Gadhafi family in recent weeks can be summarized thusly: rambling speeches that verge on the megalomaniacal. More puzzling than the father, however, is Saif, the son. He was educated at the London School of Economics, where he got a PhD, and he was known for his rather liberal, progressive views. Now, however, promising rivers of blood in his speeches. That sounds neither liberal nor progressive. To help us sort through all of this, Benjamin Barber, who resigned 2 weeks ago from the board of the Saif Gadhafi Foundation and spent much time with both father and son. Barber is, of course, a very distinguished American academic. Welcome. So, when did you first meet Moammar Gadhafi?
In 2006, just a few years after the regime had yielded its weapons of mass destruction and was seeking to improve relationships with Europe and the United States, and that was a two-way process when they were still negotiating Lockerbie, and when Gadhafi had come in from the cold as the head of a rogue state and become a potential ally and oil supplier for the West.
Now, when I met him, I thought he was on drugs. I thought it was sort of some very strange, hallucinogenic kind of moment. But that might have been a special circumstance. You spent many, many hours with him.
Well, I think,
how did he strike you as a person?
Well, I think two things. He has a very weird affect. As long ago as the 1980s, I was part of a television program that interviewed him in the desert, and he doesn't look at you in the eye. His face is slack. He speaks in a kind of very low mumble, and the affect is certainly weird.
And is he, but he strikes you as intelligent?
Highly intelligent. My own view is that a fool and a lunatic could not stay in power for 42 years in a tribal state like Libya.
You knew Saif much better, even.
Knew Saif much better, and better, too, because Saif was a young man. He's 38 now. He was a student for most of the time I knew him at the London School of Economics. The last 2 years, he finished his dissertation. And we interacted the way, you know, I might with other young scholars and young students.
And how did he strike you?
He struck me as somebody who was torn from within with perhaps three different views of the world. You have the scholar, you have the Gadhafi son, who we saw in the Rivers of Blood speech, and then you also had a typical corrupt son of a Middle Eastern dictator, kind of playboy, European yachts, Polish and Russian financial connections, making a lot of money, part of the oil industry, developing hotels. So he had these three pieces inside of him, kind of at war with one another. I mostly saw, for obvious reasons, the young scholar, the young liberal, the head of the Gadhafi Foundation, trying to do internal reform. But these other two people were there, and the one who won the battle, clearly, last week was the Gadhafi son.
Is that what you thought when you heard the Rivers of Blood speech?
I did. I thought maybe a little foolishly about The Godfather. The character Pacino played the young son of the Godfather, who had gone straight, who was a war hero, who was going to be a civilian, who was not going to be part of the Sicilian family, but when his father came under attack, changed sides, joined him, and eventually became the Godfather himself, and the most demonic and brutal of the Godfathers. And I felt with Saif that he had somehow made a choice in that internal struggle he had. He made a choice for I am the son. Clan blood is powerful in the Middle East and in North Africa. And he made the choice, if my father's under attack, if my brothers are going to die, I will stay and die with them. And that makes him in some ways the most dangerous of the Gadhafis, because he's rational, he's coherent, he's thoughtful, he understands the West, but he has now, I think, thrown his lot in with his father. And unless there's a way he can be separated from them, which seems highly unlikely, it seems he will suffer the fate of his father.
Do you think that the Gadhafis will fight to the bitter end?
I do think that. I think we sometimes forget that Muammar Gadhafi, delusional as he may be, suffers from delusions rooted in reality. He is not Mubarak, a second or third generation bureaucratic guy in the military. He is a first generation revolutionary founder on the model of Castro or on the model of Nasser in Egypt. And thus he believes deeply in the revolution. I suspect he sees what's happening now as a counter-revolution, not a liberal uprising against him. And that, I think, will mean that he intends to fight to the death. Saif Gadhafi said on Turk CNN, when asked, do you have an option B? If this fails, he says, yes, I have three options. Option A, live and die in Libya. Option B, live and die in Libya. Option C, live and die in Libya. We won't know. Was all that posturing for 7 years? Possibly. Was it all an honest commitment that then went up in the rivers of blood he talked about last week? That we won't know. My own belief is that He spent 7 years trying to be a reformer, and in the end was swallowed up in clan loyalty and revolution in ways that may set back rather than further the prospects for democracy in Libya. I think this is a clan family in a tribal land that will fight to the end for what they believe. Foolish and delusional and repressive as those beliefs might be.
You know that there are people who look at you and the people like you who say you became tools of one of the most repressive regimes in the world. You became fellow travelers of this Stalinist regime.
Right, and let me say two things about that. One is that there are Americans representing business interests, government interests all over the world, in Burma, in Saudi Arabia today, in Iraq, in Pakistan, who represent nothing other than an interest in exploiting for their own benefit those regimes. My presence and the presence of the Gadhafi Foundation International Advisory Board had been from the beginning to try to work in a static, long-term dictatorial regime for internal change. When it became apparent that Saif had joined his father, at that point, the entire international board, you can talk to other members, resigned. But to say we resign because now Saif Gadhafi and the foundation are no longer instruments of potential change, and then try to go back and rewrite history. Back in 2006 and 2007, when the Bush administration was working hard to create new alliances, to recognize the send an ambassador and say those of us who were in Libya trying to work internally for change is, I think, more than dangerous. And I think people have to ask then, should we never go to regimes which are dictatorial and try to work from within for change?
Are you hopeful about what happens in Libya?
I'm torn myself, because I'm always hopeful when people rise up in the name of freedom and demand self-determination and demand freedom.
But you sound like you think there's going to be chaos.
But my fear there is partly because the world is assuming it's Cairo all over again, that we are overlooking the presence of al-Qaeda down the line, that we're overlooking the presence of a possible civil war, that we're overlooking the possibility that tribal rivalries will come out if and when Gadhafi is gone, and you'll find different tribal chiefs asserting themselves. My fear is that we have not yet established the foundations for democracy. And here, Fareed, you've written so eloquently about this. We know historically that most revolutions in democracy's names have not achieved revolution, in part because it takes protesters, brave and courageous protesters, to make a revolution, but it takes citizens to make a democracy, and that's a long, slow process, and that process has not yet gotten underway in Libya. It's underway in Cairo, not yet underway in Libya. I hope it will, but I won't say I'm skeptical, but I'm ambivalent. I pray for and am excited by the turn of events, but also worried as a historian and a political scientist that too much is expected with too little foundation for real progress towards democracy.
Benjamin Barber, thank you so much.
Thank you, Fareed.